Notebook on Cities and Culture is supported in part by Doomed to Fail, a weekly podcast that explores the interface between the engineering that shapes our world and the cultural touchstones that give it meaning. Join Tim and Catherine, two engineers, as they have intelligent and humorous conversations on subjects ranging from digital instrumentation to the city of Minneapolis to the inventor of the Super Soaker. You can find the show on iTunes or at doomedtofailpodcast.blogspot.com. Season 1 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Carl Haley, Daniel Murphy, and Douglas Dollars, who reminds you to be present, be loving, and that life moves really fast. Recently profiled by GQ magazine and prominently described as a guy who hates Los Angeles. Tell me what do you have to do to gain that sort of mark of public distinction in the media?
Oh man, I think you have to be a minor public figure.
Okay.
You have to be some kind of public figure. And then also a native of San Francisco. I think that's the qualities that make you a famous hater of Los Angeles.
It's automatic.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, sitting down in Westlake today in Maximum Fun headquarters, by the way. Maximum Fun being the empire of podcasts and radio shows presided over by my guest today, Jesse Thorn, whom you may remember from the old show, The Marketplace of Ideas. He's been on twice on that show, once to discuss his public radio program, now called Bullseye, then called The Sound of Young America, again to discuss his men's style video series and blog, Put This On. You may also know him from the podcast Jordan Jesse Go, the new comedy pop culture quiz show, International Waters. You may know him from the other Maximum Fun shows, which he does not participate in, but which go out under his banner, like Stop Podcasting Yourself, or Throwing Shade, or the other one, My Brother and Me. There we go. That's what it is. Am I missing anything, Jesse?
Did you say Judge John Hodgman?
I didn't say. You're the bailiff. Judge John
I'm the bailiff on Judge John Hodgman.
I was thinking this morning in the shower, don't forget Judge John Hodgman. And I did. But I have been listening to your shows for 5 or 6 years now, and you have mentioned many times your San Francisco nativity, and you mentioned often how much you long for your ancestral home of San Francisco. Tell me, are you actually required to hate Los Angeles by being from San Francisco, or is that just something you're inclined to do because you grew up in San Francisco?
No, it's absolutely requisite.
Really?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I don't think. It's sort of like if you're like in a gang neighborhood and you're wearing the wrong colors, you get your ass beat.
Sure.
It's sort of like if you say something nice about Los Angeles in Northern California.
But tell me this. I mean, this rivalry is famously unidirectional. You can say whatever you want about any city you want in Los Angeles, and no one will look at you.
And as a Northern Californian, I'm obliged to say that's because no one in Southern California cares about anything.
Sure, maybe true, but I have to wonder. I mean, I think about the larger alleged distinction of Northern and Southern California, and this is ultimately narcissism of minor differences, right? I mean, someone from the North and the South of this state, they're basically the same compared to someone from maybe any other state, any other country. The East and West halves of California. I mean, we're making something out of nothing here, right?
I don't know. I would say that, I mean, to some extent, yes. I mean, certainly to some extent other places in the world, or lots of non-urban / coastal places in the United States. I think that's true. But I think that San Francisco probably has more in common with New York or London or whatever, albeit on a smaller scale, or, as some equivalently urban European city that's smaller, Amsterdam or something like that, than it does with L.A. I mean, there are certainly certainly cultural things that are endemic to California, but in terms of the place, I think in even those things that are culturally endemic to California are significantly different in Northern and Southern California.
We're talking about burritos.
Yeah, I mean, sure, burritos, but I mean, even if you just take like new-aginess, which is a thing that people outside California are like, those crazy hippie Californians, you know,
lumped together as new agey.
Yeah, exactly. By which they're talking, by the way, about you know, urban California. People in you know, smaller cities in California are not known for their new aginess. You know, you don't go to Chico and feel like, oh, these new agey Chico people.
You do go to an Ojai or certain parts of Marin County.
Sure, but those are essentially extensions of Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Oh, okay. I was going to say. Sir. Yeah. Yes, true. But
no, I think the specific new aginess, just to take that as an example, because I've spent a fair amount of time in Marin County, which is probably the and Berkeley, which are probably the new age centers of Northern California.
Hotbeds.
And, you know, I've lived in LA now for a long time. You know, obviously I'm painting with a very broad brush here, but, you know, there's a kind of, I think the entertainment industry culture in Los Angeles makes for a lot of people who are in a state of discomfort, dis-ease, self-doubt, and seeking external affirmation, both because that may be the type of work they do literally, in the sense they may be they may be a performer that needs people to like them in order to make a living, but also, you know, a lot of people, even who aren't actors, you know, if you're a key grip, you still need the external, you're still essentially an itinerant worker, you know, you're still often working 4 weeks at a time or, you know, 8 weeks at a time. And, I think that has a very deep effect on the culture, since that is really the dominant mode in Southern California, even though it's, I don't know, maybe it's 10% of the economy or something like that. But culturally, it's very dominant since it is the culture industry. And that, you know, if you take the example, for example, of new aginess, I think the new aginess in Northern California is often very hippie-ish, which is to say communitarian, let's all hold hands and make the world a better place. The new aginess in Southern California often has to do with skin treatments.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
To be fair, it's teeth bleaching also.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and you know, juice cleanses, which are supposed to make you like more powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Or something.
From what I hear.
At the very least, skinnier. And, you know, skinniness is just not at all part of the new agey BS culture of Northern California. I mean, it's no less ridiculous, but it's a very different, sort of thrust, you know?
Right.
And the values behind it are different.
But let's point out we're sitting 9 stories above Westlake, which is mostly Central Americans. Not a lot of juice cleanses being done right where we are, nor to the surrounding many miles of us. I mean, I guess I'll put it this way. It's a segment of the culture that feels dominant, but numerically, the juice cleansers the juice cleansing key grips who need you to like them, there's not that many of them, are there?
No, I don't think it's a preponderance of the population, but they are the ones writing the narrative.
Sure,
you know, they're the ones with the power. I mean, I grew up in a substantially immigrant neighborhood in San Francisco that is, you know, not wildly different demographically from this neighborhood that we're in right now, which, as you mentioned, we're in Westlake, right near MacArthur Park in Los Angeles, which is a largely Latino immigrant neighborhood. Slightly different types of Mexicans here, you know, from different places in Mexico. And because it's 25 years later, because I'm 30, it's, you know, different Central American countries. People are fleeing from wars. But, you know, generally speaking, those demographics align pretty squarely. However, I would say that those, you know, first-generation immigrants don't really get to write the book, you know. Among other things, they often can't vote because they are non-citizens, but also, you know, they often don't speak English or don't speak English well, and so they don't get to appear in the mainstream media.
TMZ.
Yeah, exactly. Not a lot of first generation non-citizen immigrants on TMZ.
Now, for those who don't know,
Russell Brand, I guess.
Tell us exactly where you grew up in San Francisco. You know, was this a born, raised, and you were there till college situation, or what was?
Well, I had sort of two periods, both in a similar similar, roughly speaking. I mean, if it was Los Angeles, where Koreatown is 12 miles across and 12 miles wide or something.
Takes a long time to peter out. Koreatown.
Yeah, I mean, until I was, my mom and dad, when they were together, lived in this house that was on Guerrero Street between 15th and 16th, which is what you would call the intermission, and was significantly for us. Also half a block from this big block by one block housing project called Valencia Gardens, that has since been replaced with a relatively low density project. But
San Francisco is not known for its large scale housing projects.
No,
right?
This was not a high rise, but it was, I want to say, 5 stories high. And was deeply problematic. I had a lot of issues going on.
5 bad stories.
Yeah, and then my dad, when my parents divorced, my dad moved to a part of the mission that, this is very specifically San Francisco information, but near 29th, 30th and Mission,
sure,
which is sort of on the borderline between the Mission, Bernal Heights, and Noe Valley. And lived there for most of my life. While my mom lived at 16th and Guerrero until I was about 11 or 12. We got owner, move-in, evicted, and then we moved to San Jose Avenue, which is just off Valencia Street, which people who have been to San Francisco's Mission might know, and about 25th. So that again is that's pretty squarely in the Mission, but it's also not far from Noe Valley and not that, and another short hop over to Bernal Heights, which are sort of more fancier middle class neighborhoods.
You're never far away from a different neighborhood than you are in San Francisco, right? I mean, it's about 49 square miles versus 500 in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how that makes the experience different. Living in Los Angeles, you have to cross vast distances quite a lot. In San Francisco, I mean, does it spoil you for being able to get around, I guess?
Of course it does. Yeah. I mean, that's I mean, the things that are really, all those sort of cultural differences between Southern California and Northern California, it's easy to oversell those, as I think you sussed out. I mean, it's fun also to oversell them.
Oh, sure.
But it's easy to oversell them, but the geographic differences and the planning differences couldn't be more stark. San Francisco is, as you said, it's 49 square miles. It's bound in by on 3 sides by water, and on the south by unbearable cold, by an impenetrable wall of fog that starts in around the Excelsior and gets really thick in Daly City.
Terra incognita beyond that.
But it's a very small place, and it was also built in, it was also mostly built in the 19th century, whereas Los Angeles was mostly built in the 20th century. I mean, when I moved to L.A., the thing that I was struck by was the fact that things that were near me were not near me.
Not in the sense that you knew near.
Yeah, exactly. I felt like no matter where I was, I might as well be living 15 miles outside of town, which in San Francisco is a pretty far away from living in town.
Right, you're not in town. You're 15 miles away.
But in Los Angeles, 15 miles is just a normal amount of distance. And
that's that's a downtown to Santa Monica.
Stretch. I mean, things that are in your neighborhood are often 2 miles away, or 1.8 miles away, whereas 1.8 miles in San Francisco is a whole other part of San Francisco.
Right.
And the result of that is that your lifestyle is determined by the traversing these distances, which I from what I understand is actually the dominant mode of life in the United States.
It's kind of, yeah.
It's just unfamiliar to me. There's no, where I live right now, which is in Los Angeles, there's one restaurant within walking distance of my house, and that restaurant is, half a mile from my house.
I don't know how much you want to say about the neighborhood you live in Los Angeles.
I live in Mount Washington, which is near Highland Park. People might have heard of. It's the northeasternmost part of Los Angeles. There's a commercial street that is the commercial street for my neighborhood. It's a 10-minute drive, and I don't live up a hill.
Right, right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's just how the place is structured. And people fight in Los Angeles to keep that. I mean, I was just listening on the radio to, they've released this new master plan for Hollywood, which includes a modest amount of density for the most urban part of Los Angeles, or one of the most urban parts of Los Angeles. And, you know, this is something that the mayor and the council person for the area, who aspires to be mayor when the current mayor leaves, have been trying to do, you know, trying to create a city out of Los Angeles.
Right.
And the Hollywoodland Tenants Association is battling them tooth and nail because they don't want all these people smushed together.
Right.
That's what she said on the radio.
Yeah, it is. I hear you. I mean, it's safe to say I enjoy Los Angeles maybe more than you profess to, but I agree with everything you've said here about the frustrations of the place. And I mean, I live in Koreatown, just west of here, and we're just west of downtown in Westlake. And Koreatown is, of course, was your neighborhood, your landing neighborhood into Los Angeles, for, I think, similar reasons that does feel like a city, right?
Right. I mean, well, relatively speaking,
Sure.
yeah. I mean, I could at least go to the store when I wanted to get a soda without getting in my car. You know, I mean, one of like the defining experiences of where I live now, which again is in urban Los Angeles, it's not in the suburbs or whatever.
The suburbs are 50 miles away.
Yeah, not only are there no restaurants that deliver food to my house. I was just talking to some New York people who had just moved here from New York, and they were like, how are we going to get food delivered to our house? And I said, well, don't move to my neighborhood because there are zero restaurants. There's literally not one restaurant that is within striking distance of my home.
Lots of delivery in K-Town. Hope they move there.
And when I go to get a pizza, I have to go and get it. Then I go and I stop to buy ice cream sandwiches for dessert. And it's, you know, it's a 35, 40-minute operation to go pick up pizza
You had to start an internal combustion engine like 6 times during the course
and this is from the equivalent of, you know, on the corner. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't going to a different thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm used to the idea of going to a different thing, but my definition of that is so completely different. Like, it's just down the road in Los Angeles often means 2 or 3 miles.
Right.
Which, you know, means that you can't do more than a thing.
It's often true, but, you know, I wonder, it's like Max Planck said about science advancing by funerals. You mentioned those Hollywoodites worrying about the people smushed up together. I mean, from what I can tell, people our age and younger moving here don't really want to put up with that trip for an ice cream sandwich taking 45 minutes. And Los Angeles has built out to its limits as San Francisco did a long, long time ago. I mean, things you can reside here with some optimism about that, right? Things are not going to get more suburban and worse as far as distances.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. But the sad truth is that the city's built.
Yes.
I mean, there's things that, you know, infill is great. I'm all for it. And public transportation's great. I'm all for it. But, you know, if you take the example of the subway system here in Los Angeles, which I know you've ridden, I've ridden, the sad truth is that while the subway system is, you know, because it was relatively recently constructed, built 10 years ago or so, it's clean and efficient. So the trains are nice. All of the things that you would want, and the stations are in places where you would want them to be, except that there isn't really any place to put a station. You know, theoretically, like I grew up at the 16th and 24th and Mission BART stations in San Francisco. BART's the subway in San Francisco. And those were definitional places for me. You know, that was traversing between those two places was my territory, you know?
Right.
And there's nowhere to put the equivalent of that unless there's no there, you know, as they say. You know, there's there's no central, there's no hub. So you take the subway somewhere, and then you're like, great, well, the thing I'm going to is still 2 miles away, so what do I do now?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Again, I do understand your frustrations. A lot of it does seem to come from the fact that all this stuff is a little too big, or a lot too big and a little too new to serve us so very well yet. But, you know, San Francisco, I lived there briefly myself as a kid, so briefly that I don't even remember where I lived in the city, but it's a city I enjoy now and take every chance I can get to visit. But at the time, when I was 4 or 5, it was the most terrifying place I could imagine. Just insanity and aggressive homeless, and it seemed so filthy 3 feet off the ground. And, now, as I said, now, great, love it. But tell me, your childhood in San Francisco, did you have that phase of being scared by it and you came to love it, or was it always just like, this is home?
No, I mean, it's just home. I mean, there's certainly scary stuff happened.
Right.
I mean, I was born in 1981, and so, even though I went to private school until high school, and I should say, like, I was on scholarship, but I went to private school until high school, and I didn't have to deal with gangs among my peers because I was mostly hanging out with friends that I'd had since, from outside school or, private school friends from school, There was plenty of scary stuff happening in my neighborhood because it was, I mean, you've probably heard of the crack epidemic.
Yes,
it was on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was on.
Go time.
And I mean, San Francisco was never out of control. San Francisco has always been a relatively affluent city, and so it wasn't like I was in the Lower East Side in 1978 or something like that.
Right.
But it was there's gunshots regularly. And
batteries being thrown at you from high windows.
Yes,
right?
that did happen one time. We walked past the projects, which were, like I said, I mean, they were on the corner. We were half a block away from them, but we usually went the other direction to get places. But we had to walk past the projects to get to church, and the projects were like 4 or 5 stories tall, and there was solar panels on top that were angled.
Right,
the flat roof and angled solar panels, and kids would hide behind the solar panels and then jump out and from the 5th floor and throw ghetto blaster batteries.
Jeez, those are D batteries.
That could really
too.
kill you. Yeah, no, it could genuinely kill you.
Yeah. Yikes.
Like at night, it would be like, was that a gunshot or was that a fireworks or was that a car backfiring? Was a regular wondering.
In Los Angeles, it's just the sound of helicopters. The
helicopters are so horrible. Well, helicopters and leaf blowers.
Sure, depending on where you are.
Yeah,
one or the other.
Well, it's often both.
Oh, fair enough.
But it's so scary stuff did happen. I mean, I got jumped once in a while.
Right.
I don't think I got jumped more than half a dozen times in my childhood, but. I don't
think I got jumped more than half a dozen times in my childhood.
Well, but I mean, it's not like when somebody would jump you, they'd like kick the shit out of you for no reason.
Right.
Like they just wanted your money. Sure. I usually didn't have any money because I didn't have any money. But, you just give up your $3 or whatever, and you just try and accept the fact that someone just stuck a knife in your face.
Growing up, you took this all just the cost of doing business. This is what San Francisco is.
I mean, it was scary. It was, it's scary when it happens, but if if half a dozen times means that it happened every 2 years. So it wasn't like, it wasn't omnipresent, and you just learn how to stand up straight and not start, how to sort of make eye contact, but not really, and, just be somebody that is not worth messing with.
Right.
And it works fine. I mean, like I said, scary shit. One time I was in the BART station, somebody got shot.
Right there? Right in front of you?
Yeah, well, not in front of me, behind me, actually.
Oh, okay. I don't know if that's better or worse.
Well, it's better because you don't have to see somebody that just got shot.
True.
But yeah, I mean, I was coming out of the 24th Street BART station, actually, and I was headed for the turnstile. And there was 2 entrances. One was the one that I was headed towards, and one that was behind me and to my left about 150 feet. And somebody was coming down those stairs trying to get away from someone after, I think it was like a drug deal gone bad or whatever.
Right.
And got shot coming down the stairs. I mean, I read this in the newspaper. I didn't pick this up at the time.
Right, sure.
I was on the floor. But, somebody got shot coming down the stairs and fell down the stairs, and I did see the blood stain on the stairs the next day on my way to school.
Right, as I suppose you would. But
that stuff happens sometimes. But I kind of think that those are definitely not like defining traumas in my childhood.
Right.
All the defining traumas in my childhood are unrelated to place. The stuff that I got out of being there was so important to me. to make me who I am, you know?
And, I want to know about that because longtime listeners to your comedy podcast with Jordan Morris, Jordan Jesse Go, will have heard about the batteries being thrown at you, will have heard about you getting punched for wearing the wrong jacket, it seemed like from the story.
Wearing the right jacket, I think. The guy punched me because we were both wearing the same jacket.
Oh, sure.
And I said, hey, nice jacket.
I'm never going to understand that story fully, I don't think.
Yeah, I think he just thought it would be funny if he punched someone.
Right. But we've heard these stories that are mildly to very frightening about San Francisco. What comes to your mind when you think about growing up and you think, damn, I never could have gotten that had I grown up, say, in Los Angeles or Poughkeepsie or wherever?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen Rent, the musical Rent.
Sure.
It's not really my thing. But from what I understand about Rent, all of the things that it claims are good about living in an urban environment, are probably weird musical versions of the actual things that are good about it.
Really?
I mean, the thing is I grew up in a place where I was talking with my friend Bucky Sinister, who's a stand-up comedian and poet and still lives in San Francisco. And he moved to San Francisco from, I don't remember where Bucky's from, like Missoula or something like that. Sure. And, he's 5 or 10 years older than me and was a performance poet and moved to the Mission where I grew up, essentially making a living as a performance poet. Barely making a living, but making a living. As
performance poets barely do.
Yeah, and, organizing these poetry nights and selling poems. And, so his memories of the neighborhood that we grew up in are dominated by the stuff, the opportunities that you have when you live in that kind of vibrant environment. I mean, there was other stuff that was defining that I wouldn't talk about on Jordan Jesse Go because it's not stuff that happened directly to me, and it's even harder to make funny than having someone throw batteries at you.
Sure.
But it was also the AIDS epidemic when I was growing up, so we had several family friends that died of AIDS. The reality was that it was the kind of place that was full of creative people and that there was interchange. And I felt like, even as a kid, it felt like I was in a cool place with a lot of cool stuff going on. And in Los Angeles, I think its strength is that there are a lot of cool people and cool things going on. But the problem is that you are essentially insulated from them because there's no public life. There's only private life. There's only going to the mall or going, even if it's going to an event at a gallery, there's no walking down the street. So a lot of my childhood is remembering the people that, ran businesses on my street that would say hi to me on the way to school. The no hair punk rock guy that ran the newsstand on the corner of 16th and Valencia, the people at the liquor store the Korean couple that ran the liquor store that were always so nice to me. My mom's hairdresser whose shop was on 16th Street, and among other things, he had one of his employees who would only cut hair on acid.
Exclusively.
And he later started this business cutting hair on a barber chair that he would wheel around the streets of New York City.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't remember this, but I was having a talk. His name's Lino. And I was having a talk. I was talking to Lino about it, and he's like, do you remember that guy who worked at my shop who would only cut hair on acid? And I was like, what? No, I don't remember that, Lino. But that's the kind of stuff that was just going on everywhere. Right. I mean, it was the best kind of bohemian. You know what I mean?
Sure.
In addition to all of the wonderful things that come with living in an immigrant neighborhood, that's the kind of stuff that defines my childhood and my memory. I tend to have to occasionally drop the, oh yeah, crackhead broke into my house and menaced my mom at the foot of her bed with a giant knife.
Lest you forget. Yeah.
Because I don't think I read as a guy who came from a neighborhood where that kind of shit went down.
Sure.
So in order to sort of explain who I am, I have to occasionally drop that. But those aren't the defining memories of my childhood for me. They're about those things that I said. They're about, punk rock guys with foot long mohawks walking around next to cholos with Nike Cortezes and pressed khakis and hairnets.
It's a mental picture you paint here. And tell me, given the social and creative churn of San Francisco, when you were getting more and more serious about public radio with your show then called The Sound of Young America, in college and beyond, how did you come to the decision that, well, even with these advantages in San Francisco, I can't be what I want to be here. I've got to go down south to the city that I'm supposed to hate.
Well, I mean, the reason was essentially because San Francisco has all these tremendous advantages. And I did live in San Francisco after I graduated from college for a while, and was really happy and really loved it. But there is no entertainment industry there. Essentially, I was shooting myself in the foot by staying there. And, the entertainment industry is in Los Angeles. I mean, it's also, to some extent, in New York. New York is about even on media and has maybe a third of the entertainment industry of L.A.
Right. Because then the entertainment people are, broadly speaking, are the people you talk to. That's why you have to be here, essentially.
And also, I also essentially work in the entertainment industry. I mean, right. I do comedy with Jordan that you mentioned, and Jordan needs to live here because that is the other work that he does. And I didn't want to move to New York, both because I really love New York, but it was far from both my wife and my family's, and also. At the time, my wife was about to start law school to become a lawyer, and she wanted to go to law school in California so she could get, so she could join the bar in California.
Does this feel then like a form of professionally driven exile?
Well, I think you'll find that in roughly 40% of the people who work in the entertainment industry.
That's where I'm going. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you'll generally find. I mean. For a lot of people, I think that Los Angeles is like paradise. Because if you come from, to give you the capsule version, if you're like a creative, artsy type person, and you live in a suburban-y, like you live in suburban Dallas or whatever, then, or even worse, if you live in, suburban, I don't know, Minneapolis or something like that, then Los Angeles is in a lot of ways like the place that you're from, except that it also has beautiful weather and is full of stuff.
It is full of stuff.
And so you're like, this is the greatest place ever. Like, so for those people, it's like heaven,
Right.
But then I think there are a lot of people who are mostly urban, northeastern types, for whom this is like being locked in hell where the sun always shines. And, I probably am one of those people. I mean, I think Los Angeles is an amazing place in many ways. I think I'm just ruined for it.
Sure. But in your years here, you must have come up with some strategies to live here that you didn't have when you first set foot in Los Angeles and were, I assume, bewildered.
Well, I don't know. Los Angeles isn't bewildering. Los Angeles is what it is. I mean, it's definitely true that you learn the secrets of Los Angeles, and which aren't evident in the way that they would be in another kind of city, because everything's in a shitty strip mall.
Often true.
So like somebody has to tell you which thing in the lousy strip mall is not is good. You have to learn that Jonathan Gold tells you what restaurants are good and that sort of thing. But the thing is that when you live somewhere, when you live in a neighborhood, your world extends out through the neighborhood, and your lifestyle is throughout that neighborhood. So that if you're going to accomplish a certain errand, you are in the place that you feel that you're at home in throughout the course of that trip.
Whatever you're doing, you're essentially at home still.
Yeah, and you're interacting, and you're getting juice out of it, or I am, because it's what I know. And in Los Angeles, there's no shortage of places to go, but there's no in-between. The in-between is you try and get as nice a car as you can afford because you want to be comfortable when you're on the freeway.
Right.
And I would not go on the freeway for, a month, in San Francisco easily. The only reason I really go on the freeway would be to go to the Nordstrom Rack in Colma or to go to the East Bay.
Sure.
And so it's that in-between part that I really miss, and there's no real replacing that. But I have recently started to – I'll tell you the one thing that I've done that I do find rewarding is we moved into this house about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that has an outdoor kitchen.
Outdoor kitchen?
I know. It's crazy. And there's like a big gas grill.
Is it just like a kitchen as you would see indoors, but no walls?
Well, except that it has a gas grill. Instead of a range, and there's no oven. I would never put a gas grill into a place I lived, but I was like, outdoor kitchen, huh? Well, we'll see if I use that. I do grill a lot of meat on that grill.
Sure.
And that's like a Southern California thing.
I guess it is.
But I don't know. I mean, especially like since I've had a kid, I find it hard because those people that we know that have kids, friends of ours and acquaintances of ours that are in the same position as us, they live a 35-minute drive away. And so you can't have a casual social interaction with someone that lives 35 minutes away.
Right.
It just doesn't work. You can have a half day if you want to plan a half day thing, but nobody can just pop on over. That sort of bums me out because I know that some of my best friends now are people that are people who I grew up with because our parents spent time together when we were literally babies. I don't know if we're going to be able to figure out how to make that happen.
There's some sense in which you want to keep your son from enduring the alienating elements of Los Angeles. Kind of like that.
There's places in Los Angeles. I mean, the neighborhood that we live in right now, Mount Washington, is very nice and it's full of nice people and creativity and stuff. And
it's full of La Abeja.
It is. I like to go to the restaurant La Abeja. Just went there yesterday for Father's Day. But it is, I don't know. I mean, like the best parts of Los Angeles, in my mind, approximate what's good about living in the suburban parts of the Bay Area.
Spoken like a true Northern Californian.
No, but I mean, like my wife likes Mount Washington because it reminds her of, she grew up in Marin County, and it reminds her of what Marin County was like before it was only rich people.
Right.
Because her family are from Marin County for several generations. To me, it reminds me a little bit of the nice parts of Oakland or, Albany, Berkeley, the nice parts of the East Bay that I like, in that they have access to things that are cool, but it's not really an urban context. And, people are nice and that kind of thing.
All the extras.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, tomorrow, because this is going up the same day we're recording. Tomorrow, viewers of your Men's Style series, Put This On, will get to see the first London episode that you've shot in London for Put This On in a part of a grander Men's Style Cities project, it seems to be. What can you tell us about what you found out from your readers of Put This On, from people you know, about what Men's Style Cities are, what makes a Men's Style City?
That's interesting. I mean, it's different. We had this big vote, on Put This On for our second season to figure out what 3 cities we would go to, because we figured we could do 6 episodes and we couldn't afford to go to 6 cities. So we figured we'd do 2 episodes in each city and then we'd have the top 3 cities. And there were places that I was kind of excited to go to that didn't win. I was into the idea of going to Hong Kong, but Hong Kong is not a stylish city for menswear. It is one of the few places that has menswear making tradition. So there would have been plenty of stuff for us to check out. But, is not historically been known as a stylish city. And
half the shirts I pull out at Goodwill do have the Hong Kong tailor's tag.
Yeah, totally. And the Hong Kong tailoring tradition is still very much going strong. As the economies change, it's you pay closer to what you would pay in the first world these days. But the winners ended up being New York, London, and Milan, which is interesting because they are very different cities. I mean, people know what New York is like, I think. I think it is probably maybe not the most stylish city because I think all American cities sort of pale next to, say, the big cities in Italy in terms of just average level of stylishness.
Is it the newness of American cities? The traditions haven't been established, or why are we?
It's just America's doesn't put America is a very utilitarian nation rather than an aesthetic nation.
If it was utilitarian, we'd wear better shoes than we do.
Well, we wear cheap shoes.
Sure, that's a form of utility.
Yeah, I think, but I do think that New York is probably the coolest city in the world. I mean,
cool
Paris
meaning what?
Paris might disagree, and I haven't spent any time in Paris, so I have a hard time.
Paris will always disagree.
Besides secondhand, but. I mean that what's cool. For one thing, it's a great fashion city. It's one of the great fashion cities, along with Paris and Milan, and it also has the element that makes it special as an American city, which is that it's multicultural. It's fundamentally multicultural. That is part of what it is. Obviously London is also multicultural, but they sort of try and fight it. And so when we did stories in New York, part of what we were trying to get at was that multiculturalism, and that sort of that melting pot metaphor has been given over largely to like mixed salad or something that's more politically correct.
Sure,
but the idea that there are all these different things, all these different cultural groups, both ethnic or national cultural groups, but also skins versus mods types.
Naturally,
not skins versus mods in New York, but that kind of thing. And so we did stories that tried to explore that. Our big lead story was these guys called Lowheads, who are these urban guys, and it started with a sort of generation of the New York equivalent of gangbangers. Gangbanging, gangs in New York are very different than they are out here on the West Coast. But, these neighborhood crews that were committing crimes.
Right. As they do.
Not getting into big murder wars like they did in Los Angeles, but definitely committing crimes. And wearing these luxury clothes or fake versions of luxury clothes. And one of them was polo. And this polo tradition, there's no like Gucci gang anymore, but these same guys and also generations after them still wear polo. And they wear the versions of polo that are the most evocative of the fantasy that polo sells, which is to say they don't always wear the most logoed the way that they would with Gucci or something like that.
The most on-brand polo.
They wear the ones that that explicitly call out the artificiality of the fantasy that polo sells, which is part of the appeal for them.
A couple layers deep into that.
Yeah,
what is polo selling fantasy wise? We've all seen the brand about.
They're selling something that is sort of mid-Atlantic luxury, which is to say partly informed by traditional American values, partly informed by traditional British values. So they sell club ties and riding clothes and then classic American tailored clothing with a strong British influence. So it's sort of like this international version of luxury, though not very Italian. But obviously Ralph Lauren himself is an Jewish immigrant kid. And so part of the appeal for these hip hoppers that wear it is the idea that he essentially told his story and in so telling made it real. So they like the things that, they're really into this character called the Polo Bear, which is like
Polo
this.
bear.
It's like if anybody remembers the cover of Kanye West's first album, I think maybe his second album, the bear was on too. The Dropout Bear.
Yeah,
the Dropout Bear
Dropout.
the Dropout Bear is an allusion to the polo bear.
Ah, I knew that.
So the polo bear is like this teddy bear that wears polo clothes, and often the clothes that feature him wearing the polo clothes.
Oh, sure. It's
right. So it's like
a mirror reflecting a mirror.
It's
Got
like
it.
a depiction of a depiction, right? And it's definitely the progression of the simulacrum. But that's what they like because it depicts the process of creating the fantasy. Like they don't pretend that they know they have no interest in going skiing, but they like to wear a clothing with a depiction of a skier, or they're not interested in going hunting, but they like the idea of wearing clothes with a picture of hunting or representations of hunting because it essentially is them telling their story that they are capable of success. And they are sort of taking the success of this other cultural group, white people,
Sure.
and making it their own.
Maybe I don't want this success, but I have the equivalent of skiing in my own context.
Right, exactly. And so stuff like that. And people who are doing these reinterpretations, remixes of these cultural values were really interesting to me. And then in London we did two things. One of them was looking at these classic traditional values, the classic traditional aesthetic values, Savile Row, for example, and then looking at how those have been sort of recreated for a contemporary context, which is a lot of the exciting stuff that's happening in London right now. Because essentially, as Patrick Grant, who's the owner of Norton & Sons, explained in our video that's coming out this week, Savile Row was the center of menswear until the 60s. Essentially, England led many of the sartorial revolutions of the 20th century. Beau Brummel helped make men wear clothes that weren't frou-frou, that were
But still very much attention to detail.
simple and functional. Yeah.
Yes.
And then, and on through the Peacock Revolution in the 60s, the Teddy Boys and then the Peacock stuff, the stuff that you imagine the Beatles wearing in 1967. Then that all ended, and it just became about tradition. And only now are people thinking about new ways to apply that tradition. So we interviewed, for example, this guy who runs this company called Dashing Tweeds. And, historically, tweed has been essentially like a camouflage garment because it's for hunting. So it's made to reflect the colors that are in its context. So when someone wears
The grounds of your estate, for example.
Exactly. Or if if you're Scottish, just the land in Scotland that you live in every day, or if you're Northern Irish or whatever, the same thing. And so he has taken that idea and extended it into the city. So he actually went and took color samples from all over London in order to create new tweeds that not only were functional for the equivalent sporting activities of the city, which is like cycling and stuff like that.
Right.
So he was including, blacks, grays, blues, along with other colors that he found in the environment, yellows, purples, with reflective materials, like 3M super reflective materials.
Right.
For cycling, so that these really were sporting clothes, but they were just sporting clothes for a lifestyle where sport isn't something that happens in the country, and then business is something that happens in the city where things have changed. So that was sort of what we did in London.
How radical a choice is that? In the context of menswear, to alter tweed in this way. I mean, I find it hard to say whether that sounds like it could be a permanent thing or over like that.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on how some of his design. He's a very fanciful guy and the most charming man ever, and some of his things are like fashion-y in the sense that they're like artistic experiments. It's like talking to a performance artist or something like that. But some of his fabrics are very beautiful, and the truth is that one of the nice things about tweed, one of the reasons that tweed is having a resurgence now, besides that it's just, a very utilitarian fabric, is that it's one of the only ways that a man can really incorporate color. And so what he's doing is really expanding the palette of possibilities for that color and the context in which that color might be considered to be appropriate, which I think is a pretty neat idea. I mean, whether his business specifically will work out, I don't know, but the idea of creating tweeds in in a way other than the classic traditional way is really interesting to me, at the very least. And then Milan is like the Los Angeles of Italy.
I've never heard it put that way before. That's fascinating to me.
I mean, it is. It's a very sort of relative to other places in Europe. I mean, it's not relative to Los Angeles. It's very car-centric. It is a fashion city, but it's not a beautiful city relative to other cities in Italy. I mean, it's not an ugly city, but it's not like, you're not like, oh my gosh. Our producer is Neapolitan and had nothing but bad things to say about Milan. We're like, you're supposed to be finding good things about Milan for us to highlight.
Right.
He's like, oh yeah, it's not even Italian, it's European.
That's what they say. It's European, not Italian.
Yeah, people walk around in like, you see people wearing like Loden capes, which is like an Alpine thing.
Sure.
And Milanesa, fried cutlets.
Yes, I know them well.
Which are throughout Latin America as well, are like an Austrian thing. So there's a lot of northern influence in Milan, but it's also the center of the fashion industry. Certainly the men's part of the fashion industry, and right up there with Paris in terms of the world. And it's the center of the consolidation of the fashion industry. So a lot of what we looked at there was how the changes in the fashion business have affected the businesses, especially artisanal businesses and sort of historical businesses.
The industry and the culture of men's style is so clear and present in places like New York, London, Milan, and even San Francisco. The men's style culture on the street is clearly there. People don't say that about Los Angeles so much. Is this a city that you regard as maybe being actively hostile to a men's style related project, or is it just nihilistically neutral to it?
Well, I mean, Southern California is at the center of certain men's aesthetics that have been very important in the last 30, 40 years.
True.
I mean, I would say that surfing and skateboarding style are one of, probably second and third only to hip-hop style in terms of ascendancy over the past 40 years or so. And those are both certainly Southern California driven. I'm not crazy about either of those.
Nor am I.
Both of them, to some extent are anti-styles, are sort of demonstrations of how little you care about aesthetics, which, as someone who cares a lot about aesthetics, is not very appealing.
Yes.
I mean, the thing that happens in Los Angeles among, and again, a lot of times when you talk about this, you're cutting out all of the not white people.
Which, shall we say, is the majority of Los Angeles.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the weird things about Los Angeles is the extent to which cultural and ethnic groups are separated from each other and separate from each other. At least certainly relative to what I'm used to. But if you're talking about the classic sort of LA story, Los Angeles,
which is not the one I exist in, but
then you're looking at a culture where, in order to demonstrate, it's this thing about where your cultural signifiers, your aesthetic signifiers, the way you dress and that kind of thing, are demonstrations of how little you care because you're so powerful / creative.
I take it you've met a few people like this in the course of your work in Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah, of course. And so those people...
You can afford to be showing body parts you wouldn't be showing necessarily. Scrota, say, for example.
Yeah, and then the other side... So that also exists in Northern California to a great extent. Although there's much less, at least on the street, of the kind of subcultural aesthetics in LA. I mean, there certainly exist, but there's just a lot less guys, dressed in crazy Burning Man outfits on the street in Los Angeles than there are in San Francisco. But there's this in that, especially in that entertainment culture, which again I think forms the dominant narrative of Southern California. There is it's sort of that I don't care attitude paired with a need to be physically attractive. So what you get is people who are often wearing very, very expensive clothes that are designed to look like you don't care about them at all.
I think of it as the rich people have the rich version of the poor people stuff. They have the $90 flip-flops and the $900 jeans that have holes already.
Exactly. So rather than asserting your aesthetic skills through your clothes, you are wearing this thing that demonstrates how little you care. Now, there are obviously other cultural groups that have other aesthetic values. I mean, if you want to talk about, hip-hop aesthetics and stuff like that, we could. But in terms of the dominant, powerful, rich culture in LA, it's that. And then that combined with, personal aesthetics, working out, wearing colored contact lenses, getting your hair dyed, like that kind of thing, is expected, I think, because of the influence of the entertainment industry, where it is a sort of a requirement of your work. I mean, it was living in LA in a way that it never would have been the case in San Francisco. I had to make an affirmative decision not to take pills to keep myself from going bald.
Wait, was this somehow fate presented you with these pills and you were...
No, but I mean, when you are working in the entertainment industry, it genuinely affects your work if you go bald, your work opportunities.
I hear those pills don't work.
It depends. They work for some people or don't work for other people, et cetera.
I'm letting my hairline recede away.
Yeah, I just decided I didn't want to get involved in that level of self-hatred.
Right, and I don't think I have the money for those pills either.
But even if you're just talking about people getting their teeth fixed or something like that, right. So it's those things become important. And then how expensive you can get your clothes that you pretend not to care about at all also becomes important. And it makes a weird, sort of ugly, unpleasant thing. And then the things that are the most sort of distinctive and vital just happen to be ones that I'm not interested in. Like, I'm not really interested in skateboarding aesthetics, at least skateboard clothing aesthetics, or surfing aesthetics, which are both at their most interesting here, but also not interesting to me.
Sure. But, to cap this off, it's thinking about these maybe tasteless or alienating high-profile elements of Los Angeles you've discussed. Are they really that hard to get away from? I mean, for you have to deal with the entertainment industry so much that there's that burden right there already. But, I mean,
it's dominant. I mean, it is dominant. This is a place where there's a report about Usher on the afternoon news.
I guess so. I've never seen the afternoon news in Los Angeles, and I don't have a car, so I don't go on the freeways. And I go to Korean tailors recommended by you, where I speak my terrible Korean to them, but I'm working on it. I mean, it seems like maybe it's a burden to have to learn multiple foreign languages to get away from the Usher on the evening news, but it's possible. It's possible to selectively approach Los Angeles, right? I mean, you can.
Yeah, but that selectivity, it leads to the kind of alienation that I was talking about.
Fair enough.
So that's the thing.
Other side of the same coin.
There's no doubt that Los Angeles is full of amazing stuff. And that is Los Angeles' saving grace. I mean, that's the reason why I don't just want to kill myself. You know what I mean? Like Los Angeles, there's tons of amazing places to eat. There's tons of wonderful stuff to do. Those are all very much true. And if you are excited, if you're the kind of person who gets excited to know about secrets, then Los Angeles is perfect because
who doesn't love a secret?
It's why Los Angeles is obsessed with whatever food truck everyone is standing in line for. It's because a lot of people here get off on the idea that Los Angeles, they have to like discover what's good about Los Angeles. But I just want to live in a place that's good.
Understandable. And that's why you probably always have some gears going on in the back of your mind about how can I one day make my grand homecoming to San Francisco, right? This is your plan, right?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, you know, what's funny about it is that it's weird for me because in this, you know, in a certain way, because I'm from San Francisco, which is such a wonderful city, and I really do feel that it is, I'm sort of ruined for a lot of other places. But I, at the same time, have a conflict, which is, you know, you can't go home again. That's essentially what it is.
Really?
You know, you can't go home again. And
I mean, I hear people say it,
not
but it's
only
true.
Not only is the place, has the literal place that I'm from been subsumed by affluence and, you know, gentrification, but it's almost like, you know, when you leave home to do something bigger and then you come back, it's a sort of a fundamental admission of defeat. and you know, San Francisco is also, I mean, the negative thing that Southern Californians say about San Francisco is that it's provincial.
And I haven't even heard them say that.
Right. I mean, they usually don't care. But that is, I wouldn't go so far as to say that's true, to make the blanket statement that that's true, but there is merit in that. I don't know. I mean, the reason that I would want to move back to San Francisco right now, besides that I do love San Francisco still, is, you know, to be closer with my family and, you know, so that my son can spend more time with his grandparents and so on. But there's a part of me that I'll tell you, you know, when I'm in Brooklyn, I don't have to deal with the emotional pain of looking at Brooklyn and thinking about all of the things that were leveled to build this. I mean, not literally physically leveled, but, you know, I don't have to look at Brooklyn and think of it as I can just be a rich guy in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? Because I don't have any emotional investment in
clean slate
in what was there before. I mean, I have some. I feel bad to some extent, but if I'm in Park Slope, I can just enjoy a nice bagel. You know, good bagels there. By the way, Brooklyn Bagel Bakery is a really good place to get bagels here in Los Angeles.
All right. Tip, listeners.
But I don't have to, you know, when I'm in the Mission District where my mom still lives, on the one hand, it's the place that I love more than any other, but on the other hand, there's no way for me not to look at it through the emotional lens of what was destroyed by gentrification. And so, even though I am now a member of the gentry, it's a very... To
be fair, you're not landed.
It's true. I'm not landed yet. I hope to get there, but that's true. I am a renter. But it's tough. I mean, it's emotionally difficult for me to be caught there. You know, in the way that I remember as a kid, I was in this thing called the Society for American Baseball Research, and there was all these old Jewish guys from Brooklyn who would, you know, complain about the Dodgers moving to LA. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I think that none of them lived in Brooklyn anymore. All of them wore Brooklyn Dodgers hats. And I think that and I understand now for them the pain of having this really vibrant place that they grew up in destroyed by cultural forces beyond their control.
Indeed.
And even though San Francisco is a beautiful, amazing place still, it has a lot of baggage for me that make it tough. But, you know, Brooklyn's 3,000 miles away, and I get migraine headaches in the summer when it's hot outside. So it's tough. It's tough for me to move there. So I just have to get used to LA, I think.
I've been speaking with the deeply conflicted Jesse Thorn, host of Bullseye, co-host of Jordan Jesse Go. He's also, you'll hear him on International Waters, the new comedy pop culture quiz show. He's the bailiff on Judge John Hodgman. You'll see him on Put This On, the Men's Style web series and blog, which is going to London tomorrow. Jesse, always a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I will say also that I am considering retiring to Santa Cruz.
Oh, fair enough. Where you went to college, alma mater, Santa Cruz.
Hang out with some nice hippies, When you're old, you just want some hippies to give you some almond butter or whatever.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with all of the cultural creators, observers of the urban scene, and internationalists. I did that in a different order that time on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to the people backing in this season, including Aidan Nullman, Andy Cooney, Ben Bartley, Brian J. Dell, Doubt Us Artwork, Greg Bigelow, Greg Linster, Henry Coronan, Umberto Grant, James Faber, Jonathan McCalmont, Mark Larson, Matt Warren, Mia Muratori, Nicholas Croft, Paul Doyle, Ray McGuire, Rob Montz, Robert Foley, Roberto Medri, Samuel Hansen, Sean Dudley, Small Demons, Stephen Ingles, Steve Himmer, TSD, and Wayne Wright.